to communicate with the backend that we just built, we're going to use Axios. So let's just install Axios. Let's go back. Let's queue the terminal. Yarn add Axios. So we don't need to install types for Axios. Axios comes with a type already. Let's clear and let's start the server again by typing yarn dev and enter. Let's go back to VS Code. So I want to configure Axios. I don't want to keep calling Axios from all my files that I'm going to have to talk to my server. So I want to configure an Axios instance that I will use and also have a global interceptor that is going to intercept the request and response from Axios and then handle it appropriately. So instead of going to every level of my files and folders to handle Axios, handle not intercept, handle the responses, handle the request, I want to set up a simple file that will do all that. And I know that, anytime I call from this file, it's going to take care of handling error for me, handling responses and all that. So let's go and do that. So we're going to go to the source, right click the folder, call it config. And then right inside config, right click and create a file called axios.ts. And just like we do for every of them, create an index size. Let's say index.ts. We'll be needing a base URL, which is if the URL we are going to talk to is, let's say, https, let's say google.com. And every other thing that we want to do is /https google.com / something. Then we don't have to, keep repeating https google.com / all over the application. So what we need to do is let's go outside here and let's create an env file. So let's, in the top directory, same level as your package.json, your node_modules, right click and click on new file. Let's call it .env. It should be called .env actually. And let's base URL. So in fit, if you're using fit, you have to say fit underscore. So you must start with fit. You must have a prefix of it. I'm going to see the underscore is coming for me, but obviously you have to use fit first. So I'm going to say fit underscore base underscore URL underscore dev. And it's going to be our server initially when we run it was running localhost 4000. So I'm going to say http / I guess localhost 4000. Yeah, so this is our base URL. So anytime we want to use it, we just simply call the base URL. So we don't need to say https localhost 4000 in every part of our application. So let's go back to Axios configuration here. And then let's actually import Axios. So let's import Axios from Axios. Does it work? Axios. I need a toast library that I would use to show an error message to the user. So I'm going to install a simple package that I use a lot for toasting. Like React Toast, but I'm not using React Toast. It's called Kogo Toast. So I'm going to say yarn add Kogo -toast. It's a very simple React Toast library to present information and all that, and I really like it a lot. I'm going to clear. Now I'm not going to start the server so that I don't have to come back and kill the server anymore. And I'm going to say import the Kogo Toast from Kogo Toast. So let's start off with our setup for Axios. So we say export const instance, which is equals to axios.create. Now here is the main thing. This is an Axios instance. You can give it any name you like. This is an Axios instance. It's of type Axios instance. We don't need to pass a type here because it's been inferred. Now we say Axios create. We pass in a base URL. Our base URL, if you want to call environment variable in fit, you have to say import.meta.env. Then the name that we gave it. So we call us as vit_base_url_dev. And that is that. Then for this one, it just our header that will be appended to all the requests you're making, which simply says access control allow origin, allow from every origin. Now, if you remember, in our backend, we implemented CORS, the CORS package, which simply means that accepts requests from any domain. So in this case now, we just have that. What else do we want to configure in this our Axios instance? Now, after creating our instance, we move on to say insta.interceptor, which is Axios interceptor. And I want you to intercept the request. And what we want to do here, we're going to use the config, which is the internal Axios request config, we just want to append an option to it. So we say let auth state be equal to window, which is our browser window, dot session storage to get item token. Now this token is the same token that we, initially when we were creating our server, we created a token, a JWT token that we sent to every request. That when they want to make something, a request to our server, you have to pass back that token to us, which we use to authenticate you. So this same token here, in this case, for this application, we are going to store it in session storage. So what we are doing in Axios right now is that we are getting this token back from the window object. So window the session storage to get item token. Now we're using session storage. The difference between session storage and local storage is that session storage, once you close the tab, is gone. But for local storage, it's just there. It's just even if you close the tab, it's still there. Okay. And then what are we doing? We are passing it as authorization. If you remember, we needed to do authorization earlier on. And we are saying bearer. So the authorization is bearer, and then we pass our token. The same thing that we did for in our backend when we are using Thunder clients, or whether you're using Postman or Insomnia, whatever you used. But back then, so we are not appending it to the headers. We are passing to the header as authorization, and the value is bearer, and then the token itself that was returned. And then we say return config. And if there is an error, in this case, we want you to throw this error. So we reject with this error. Moving on, still in the interceptor here, but this time around, we are looking at the response instead of the request. So this is when we are sending, we are using the interceptor to append this to send. So if you don't do it like this, then you have to do this for every time you want to use Axios, you have to append this. But with this now, we have just done it once and for all. For all the places we are going to need to make a request to our API, we don't have to configure that. Now, the next thing we are doing here, we are intercepting the response, and we are checking. This is Axios response. Now, I don't want to, you can create the response shape and then pass it here as a type. But for me, I will just leave it as Axios response in this case here. Now, you return the response. Now, if there is an error, which is what takes us here, we first of all check if the error status is 401. Remember, 401 is when you don't have a token or when your token has expired, and that is coming from passport. So if it is 401, we know that, oh, your token has expired. What do? We clear the local storage. So we clear everything that we have stored there before, and then we use our Congo toast to warn you that your session has timed out, which simply means that your token has either expired or whatever. We don't have we don't know. We can't read you from there. And then what do? We use the window, global window objects, and we say window the location href, which simply means that we are sending you back to the landing page. So we now need you to log in again because you obviously cannot continue if you are getting status 401, which simply means unauthorized. All right. So with that being said, what else do we want to intercept? Now, perhaps everything goes on fine from there, and we get here, we still intercept again. Still the response. We are still intercepting the response that is coming back from Axios. So in the initial one, we intercepted the request when we are sending, and then we intercepted the response and checked for somebody who is, who their either token has expired or token is not valid or whatever. And then here now we want to intercept the response itself, and let's check if the status is 200. So that is to say it was successful. What do? We first check if you have a message, if response or data message, and it is not undefined. I'm sorry, if it is empty or it is undefined, we simply log an empty string to the console. But if something is there, then we call kogotoast.success, which simply shows a green, a green background, I guess, and we pass in the message that comes back with that. So, in some of our requests, when it was successful, we added a message to our response. So maybe you see, oh, login successful, creation successful, whatever successful, and then we return the response and move on. But else, if we have an error, first of all, we check if the response error the response of data is available. If it is not, we simply return and stop executing. But if we have it, what do? We check if the status code is greater than 300. So if it is greater than 300, we now call kogotoast.error, and we say if error the response of data is true. That is what this exclamation mark here, this two exclamation mark here does is it's simply converting this to a boolean. And if it is true, then we throw the error for you. And if it is not true, well, we don't know, probably you have a network issue, and we say check your internet connection. At the end of the day, we then return promise or reject error. So with this now, we have been able to configure our Axios instance, and we can now use this instance everywhere. Now you can add more configuration, you can attach many other things, but for me and this application, I'm done here. So I'm going to go to the index.ts and export my instance there. So I'm going to say export. I'm going to say instance. So this is my Axios instance. Like I just do this all the time, create a folder, have an index folder, and export everything from there. Now that we have this, the next thing that we need to create is a custom hook. We need a custom hook to actually do the login. So let's create a custom hook. So to create the hook, let's go to the source folder and let's right click and let's create a folder. Let's call it hooks. So now right here, I'm just going to create my index.ts again, which is the usual place I export everything. I'm going to have a hook called, let's give it the file name called auth.ts for now. The file name doesn't matter for us. When you come to hooks, you know that this folder is for hooks. So let's go right inside the auth.ts and let's create something. So I'm going to say export. Let's go on. Say export const. Now, all hooks in React must start with use. So I'm going to say use auth. That is the hook name. And we're not going to pass anything to use auth itself. Then we are going to create some few states. So I'm going to say loading, set loading. I'm going to say is a use state. And then it's of type Boolean. So it's either going to be false or true. And then we say false. So initially, the loading state is false. So we import use state from React itself. So use state we hold the value. Initially, like this is going to be false because that's what we passed it. So what do we want to do now? We then create a function called login. So const login. And login is going to be an asynchronous function and it's going to take in a payload. And this payload is going to be email, which is of string, and then a password, which is of string. Now, so what I've done here is simply create an email and define the type. And then since it's another function, I have to complete this function here. Let me close this one. And what does this function do once it takes this payload? So at this point, we need to use the Axios instance to talk to our backend. So let's import Axios instance here. Import instance from $config. So right here now, let's use try catch. And what are we doing here? We're saying when we first hit this request, we set the loading to true. And then we say const response is equals to await instance.post. So Axios instance.post, and we are hitting the /auth/join. If you remember our backend, /auth/join is where we do login or registration. And then we pass in the payload here. So this is the payload, email, and password. We pass it in. Now, if we get a response back, we return response.data, which is always appended to all Axios requests. If there's an error, we log it to the console because we know that if there's an error, our Axios configuration here is going to, where is it? It's going to intercept and throw an error. So if you look at the last part of our Axios here, last part here is going to intercept it and throw whatever error comes back. So let me go back. Where is it? auth.cs. Yeah, so if there's an error, it gets thrown. And finally, we don't care if an error occurred or not, we set the loading to false. So what we are doing is, if this goes successful, set loading to false. Even if an error occurred, set loading to false at the end of the day. So we want it to be set to false. So then at the after all this, we go out of this function itself and we need to return something from our hook. So we want to return loading. I also want to return login. So these are the two hooks we are returning, hook value we are returning here, the loading and the login. So the login itself is a function that we are getting from this use auth hook, while the loading is just a state. But one other thing I want to do is I want to pass in a return type for this login here. If you look at it, when I hover on it, the return type is any. So I'm going to go to the Explorer right here inside the source folder. I'm going to right click and click on new folder, and I'm going to call it add types. So this is where I want to create types. So right here, I'm going to create a single file which is called index.ts. Now, the export interface is an interface of iLogin response. And what is the shape? We need is going to send back an email, which is a string to us. It's going to send back a token, which is also a string. And it's also going to send back an ID, which is also a string. So this is what we are going to get back from logging in. We get an email, a token, and an ID. So let's go back to our hook here, our use auth hook. Let's go to auth.ts and then the use auth. And let's go to this place here Let me close this up. Save this file. Okay. So right here, line 7, let's define the type for this. So this is going to be a promise. We are setting a promise, and it's going to be of type iLogin response or void. So we can either have a response or we have nothing. So in this case now, like here we have void. We don't return anything in if there's an error, and then also in finally we don't return anything. So we have to pass in void. So this is going to return promise. This is going to return a promise of iLogin response, which is just email, token, and ID, or nothing at all. Just like these two lines of code returns nothing. So with this now, we are able to log in, in our application. So let's go back. One other thing we need to do is to create a context, because we are going to use React context API to hold a global state for our application. We just need to know that you are logged in. The rest of the thing we are going to do, we don't need to store them in states. So let's export this quickly in our index. Let's say export use auth. So we have exported this. Now let's go back to our Explorer. Right inside the source folder, right click, create a new folder, and let's call it context. So this is where we're going to store all our context if we have more. So let's right click in the context and click on new file. Let's call it auth-context.tsx. Right here on the context, let's click on it, right click and click on new file. Let's call it auth-context.tsx. Okay, so right away, we need to also create types for our context. So let's go back to our types folder. Let's go to the index.ts for the types, and let's add more types here. So our auth context is going to take in the auth type. So we're exporting interface auth_type. The user is going to be a string. We have a loading, which is Boolean. Then we have a function which is called onLogin, and it's going to take in a payload. But we need to define a type for this payload. So what is that type? When a user wants to log in, if you take a look at our page, we pass in email and password. This is our own page that we're building. This is the finished work here. So if you look at it here, the URL, this is what we're working on. But they look alike very much, but they are the same. Now, we just take in email and password. So email and password is going to be the I payload. So let's create that type. So export interface, let's call it I payload. And then what does it have? Email of string, password of string, and that is that. So it checks it on login, takes in this payload, and it returns nothing. So it's a void. On logout, another function that we're going to pass into our React context provider. On logout is just going to it takes nothing, and also it returns nothing. All right. So now we have this. We can go back to our context and you start creating something. I'm going to say import, create context, also use context from React. So we now say that export authentication context, which is what we are calling this authentication context, is going to be create context, and we need to pass the type of the context we want to create, which is the auth type we just created here, which is this. This is the type of context we are going to pass. So our use context is going to take this. Then let's import that. So we say we import that, and then it can either be this or null. But for now, we are passing in null here. So we don't have anything right in our authentication context. Now we need to define another thing. So we say export. Caps lock. Export const authentication context provider. So we're creating a provider, which is also going to take in children. And these children are going to be React Node. Remember, we have been using React Node a lot. Oh, I forgot to do this. Children should be React Node. And React Node is found in React here. React Node. So what is going wrong? Why is it flagging? Oh, I need to finish up this function. Okay, yeah, so that is that. So we now have authentication provider, which accepts children, and this children is of type React Node. While authentication context is going to accept everything our auth type. So let's open this up. So first of all, what should we do? Let's see. So in this first line here, we are importing loading and login from our use auth hook. So let me import that. So we now have our use auth hook, the loading and the login that we created. And then we are creating a state that is called user and set user. And we are using the use state function or hook from React. And it's a type string. So we are just going to have a user. That is the email we are sending back earlier. And for now, we are naturally to an empty string. And we're going to use effect. Now, what does this use effect do? I'm importing that from React. So what we are simply doing with the use effect is that each time our page reloads, we want to say, or renders, we want to check that we have a token in the session storage. So we check. And we also check, do we have an email, which I record store user here. And then we check if it's not undefined, and if it's not null, that is the stored user, the email, and we have a token, then we set user to the stored user. So we set the user email. So each time this happens, we just check and we pass in this to say, okay, this is the email of the user that is in this system. Now, that is that. So moving on, after our use effect, we then have a function called onlogging. If you remember our auth here, where is it? No, not the hook. Let me close this. Not the hook, the types. If you remember our auth type here, we have the onlogging and the onlogout. So we already have the user, we have the loading already. We now need the onlogging and the onlogout. So the onlogging is going to take a payload and it's going to be of type email, which is a string, and password, which is a string. And it's going to be a promise. Now this function doesn't actually return anything. Instead of any, let's pass, should we pass unknown? It doesn't return anything exactly, but let's say unknown. And then what do? We call the response, and we are calling the login hook, the login hook. So we pass in the payload, which is email and password. And the login hook, if I hover on it, is showing me that it's going to return either void, which is nothing, or iLogin response, and which is why I have my iLogin response. It can actually be inferred, but let's just declare this for this one. So let's import it here. So if I put this now, saying void blah 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 is not assignable to the type of iLogin response. I'm just going to remove this. It's going to infer it, each of the type that comes. So if I hover on it, we're going to see it can either be void or iLogin response. So any of the two is going to come back as. But we know that if you are existing, we'll get back your information. If you're not existing, we won't even get to this part. The Axios Interceptor will take care of that. We won't get to it. So what we want to check is that if you exist, so if the response is not null, we call session storage dot set item and we pass in token and we say response.token. We also store your email, we say response.email. We also store your ID. So these are the keys. If you want to get them back, we'll say session storage.get item token, and that will give us whatever we stored here. Same for this one, same for this one. At the end of the day, we now set user to response.email. So we now set user to email, and then we redirect you using the global window object local location href to /dashboard, which is going to be like our home for a logged in user. So we redirect you there to /dashboard. So that's what we do if you log in. Now, if you log out, all we simply do is we remove the token, we remove the email, and we also remove the ID. Now we can simply call session storage.clear to remove all these things at once. And then once we remove everything, we also send you back to the home page, which is the slash. So if you log out, we do that. So we now need to use this. So to use this, we now have to say return authentication context dot provider, and then remember authentication context takes the auth type, which we now call values, and the values we want to pass in are user object, use as an object, to pass the values as an object is user, loading, unlogin, unlogout. And then we pass in the children that is going to come from authentication context provider. This one here, these children here, we then pass it down there. Then we are calling authentication context provider. It also has consumer and all that. So you can, if you want to get further information about React context API, you can look at the React docs for further information on that. So with this now, we have created our context and we can use it. For me, I'm going to actually put it, if we go to the Explorer, let's go to main.ts, which is like the entry file for a Vite React application. I want to use my own context here. So right here, I'm going to say authentication context. Authentication context. Okay, I need to first of all export this. So let's go back to context. Let's create an index.ts file, just like we do for all of them. Index.ts. I'm sorry, not tsx, ts des.tx. Okay, I'm going to say export. So we have authentication context, and then we have authentication context provider. So those are the two things we are exporting here. So let's go back here. We want to get authentication context provider itself. That's what we're using. And then we are going to pass the children, and the children is app, or the child is, we have a child, single child, so we say app. So this app now is what we render here, this app. And then we now pass all these things as a state value that is globally, like we can find everywhere under our app here. So let's assume you have another context that is, let's say, the more you have context, you have to now begin to look at placing your context, the right one at the top, at the bottom, whichever way you want to put. Let's say you have an application context that uses the authentication context. That therefore you must put your application context after the authentication context, because if you put application context above the authentication context, then it won't be able to read the value from your authentication context. So it's, you have to take care of all this. So with this now, we are set up and we are ready to move on to login. So if I close some of these things up, and let's go take a look at our landing page again. Let me close some of these up quickly. So let's take a look at our landing page. Let me just go from here. Oh god, now where is my pages? Landing index.ts. Now let me close this up. So from here now, we can now say that our handle submit. Once you submit, we want you to actually hit our API and try to log us in, or let's get an error back. So let's finish up that. So to move on now, let's create a state that is going to hold the value of what we have. So we're going to say const state set state. So I'm going to use the name we usually use in our when we're using class component, and this is going to be an object, and it's going to come from payload, which is just email and password, I guess, and then it's going to have an empty email, which is an empty string, a password, which is also an empty string, and then I need to import payload from types, and I need to import useState from React. Yeah, so I have that now. Payload, which is simply email and password as a string. So this is what we're having now. Now, one other thing we need to do is we want to check that the email the user provides is correct. We want to confirm that the email is correct. So let's create a simple utils that will help us validate if the email is correct. So let's just go back here. Right straight in the folder here, the source folder, let's right click, create a folder called utils, and let's create a file inside the utils. Right click on the utils, right click on validate email.ts. Now, we didn't have to do it in our backend because Yoop was doing that. We can actually still use Yoop here, but I'm just going to go with this easy. I don't want to install many libraries just to do that here. So right here we have a function called validate email, and it's just going to take the email as a string, and then this is just rejects. All these things here are just rejects. And one thing about rejects for me is that I don't bother trying to cram them. You learn what they means, but then each time you want to write them, you can simply make a Google search for rejects to test email, and then you just use that. So it's not something to worry about. So let's go back to here, and then we are going to now finally use this rejects there. So let me quickly import that. So I'm going to say import validate email from //util/ okay, I need to do my index name. I'm beginning to forget to do that now. So let's say index.ts, and let's export validate email. So let's go back here and just take away this validate-email. So let's know it's coming from the utils folder. Very easy to identify. So now, first of all, let's import our context here. So we'll say const, let's use it here actually. So const, what do we have? I think we have loading, and we have on login. From our context, I'm going to say what's it called? Use context. And what is the context we want to use? We want to use authentication context. So we go to authentication context. And then, because this is TypeScript, we have to specify that this authentication context is of type auth type. Now, this will take care of any error we have. So use context, which is authentication context, as auth type. So it's now going to have loading, login, or log out user. I don't know what else we have there. So with this now in place, let's now go to our form. Once you submit the form, we call either prevent default. We don't want the browser to refresh. And then we check, is the email correct? If it is correct, coming from our state. If it is not correct, let me import Google Toast here. So I'm going to go up and say import Google Toast from, wow, Google Toast is not coming. Okay, Google Toast. All right. So we say if this email, if it is validated and is not correct, we just throw a simple error from Google Toast here and we say invalid email. If your password is not correct, we say please provide password. We don't care if it's correct or not. If there is no password, right now we have not given a limit for passwords. Or we should actually do that, but we can say and is less than 7 because I think our UP in our backend is taking for that. So we're going to say and state the password is less than 7. It should be or if state the password is less than 7. Okay, the password is of type string. Wow. How do we convert that to number? I can just say number. Oh, no, not that. What I want to check is the length. Dot length. So let me pass this dot length. Yeah. Let me also pass this in case there's no password so that it doesn't show an error of state of password of undefined or trying to reach password of undefined. So, and then this is complaining we need to mark this as an asynchronous function. So I say async and the error goes away. So now once you click on the submit button, we validate for these fields. And if everything goes well, we call the onLogin function from our React context. So what else do we do? On the handle states, first of all, when somebody start typing, we want to destructure the values. So we're going to say const name and value. And then we are going to get that from e.current target. And then we're going to say set state to be dot. Whatever you have in state already should remain there. Then we're going to say the name, and then we set the name to the value. So that's what we are doing. So with this now is a dynamic state. We don't need to create set state function for all the fields we have. And we're just using this. If you look at it, we have a name tag. So the name is going to be email, the name is going to be password, and that's what we are reading. So if the name is password, then we pass the value for password for that. So each time you type anything, then this is going to fire. So with this now, we can test our fields. Sorry, we can test our application and see if that works. And then if everything goes well, we should now be redirected to slash dashboard, which does not exist. So we should get something like probably 404 page. I think that's what we should get. Or let me see. I think we configure something, but probably we should get something like error page or so, or that kind of stuff. All right, so let's go back here. Let's do something. We have a loading state here. So let's quickly add up some stuff. Let's use the loading. So one thing we want to do is that if the page is loading, we don't want you to be able to click on the button. So we're going to say disabled is equal to loading. So if the loading is true, disabled, you should not be able to click on the button. And then one thing, let's take this out and let's say if loading, we want you to say loading. Then else, then say this one. So if it's loading, show that it's loading. As for the input field, let's do the same thing. If it is loading, let me just copy this disabled here. If it is loading, disable. Somebody should not be able to type in there. And that is it. So with this now, we are good to go. We can test the application. Let's go back. For us to test this application, first of all, we need to also run our backend server. So we need to run two servers. The server for our backend and run the client. So I'm going to go to my terminal here. But let me run it for my VS Code. So I'm going to cd into food, cd dot. I want to go back to my foodie folder. And then I'm going to cd backend, which is the server. And I'm going to say yarn dev, which is the command, start command, yarn dev. And I'm going to go back to our VS Code. I'm going to go up here and click on these three dots. If you're like me that is zoomed out, or if you're not zoomed out, you should have terminal. Let me zoom in again. If you click on it, you see terminal, click on new terminal. Let me close the console, and I have a new terminal. I would switch to git bash. So let me take a look at my server. So my server is still starting up. Then I can start my front end yarn dev 2. and the front end is yeah, started up, it's crashed. Okay, so what could be wrong? Let's check what could be wrong. Google Toast. Wow, what's going on? Let's see. So this is complaining about prop types. It's complaining about Google Toast. What I'm going to do is just kill this. Then I'm saying yarn remove Google Toast. I'm going to remove it and reinstall it again. I don't want to even know what's wrong. I'm just going to remove that and then install it again. Add Google dash toast. Yeah, and then let me find out what's wrong. In okay, it's nothing. Let's run yarn dev again. I hope you don't get the error. I hope so. Okay, fine. Oh, could not resolve prop types. Seems like Google Toast is throwing an error. I can't really tell why suddenly we are having about error of props. What I'm going to do is I will delete node modules and just install everything again from scratch. And let's see. Let's hope it fixes that. Okay, so I resolved the issue by simply installing prop types. So I said yarn add prop types because he was complaining that couldn't find prop types. He can't resolve the type prop types. I think what's it called? Google Toast is using prop types, and he kept complaining here. Uh, could not resolve prop types. I had to pause and actually take a look at that because I was wondering. I've been seeing that. I was thinking maybe when I reinstall that again, it was going to fix it, but no, it didn't fix it. So I had to install prop types on my own, and that fixed it. So yeah, we are good to go now. Let's go test application. So we should be able to, when I put an email and password here, it should take me to, if it goes successful, it should take me to slash dashboard, which does not exist, obviously. But then let's take a look. Okay, the server is running on port 4000, database connected successfully. So let's go take a look. In browser, I'm going to type an email, so I think I use test at gmail.com. Password, I hope, well, it doesn't matter. If it doesn't exist, it's going to create. So if I click on login, it says loading. So now I shouldn't be able to, oh, yeah, it works. So it logged me in and it took me to slash dashboard, but that page does not exist. So it throws the error page, which is like 404, does not found. So the page doesn't actually exist. So now we can log in. Therefore, our authentication is working fine. And if I were to inspect this, if I click on inspect and I go to application, if I go to session storage, if I click on it, you see we have our email stored here, our token from our JWT, and our ID stored here, which we are reading. If I were to click on this here and I click on, where is it? I think not here. Where is it? Give me, let me click on this again. Oh, I can't find, okay. Oh, I know why. I know why. So I thought I had React React Dev 2 here, but obviously this is incognito, so I can't find it here. Wanted to show you something. All right, so but obviously you can see that the application is working. We are in slash dashboard, so that's to say that it logged me in and everything went successfully for our landing page. So we are done with the landing page.